A man adjusts his cap with bells, that metallic and cheerful sound that precedes laughter or scandal. His hands, hardened in the art of pantomime, know all about subtle mockery and exaggerated gestures. His eyes, however, have the sharpness of a hawk. They search for vulnerable spots in the silk armor of the courtiers and in the majestic seriousness of king. He puts on his work smile like a mask. It is not a smile of happiness, but an instrument, a weapon at the ready. His name is Triboulet, and in the records of history, his figure stands as embodiment of an enigma. How much power can a man hold whose trade is ridicule? What if I told you that this man, this court clown, because of a single joke placed in the worst possible place and time, was just a breath away from losing his life? That, standing before the King of France himself, he heard the weight of a death sentence fall upon him, and that, in a twist worthy of the best divine comedy, he used the very same weapon with which he had caused his fall, his sharp tongue, his diabolical wit, not to beg, but to build his own salvation. This is not a fable about a wise fool. It is the account of psychological duel, a game of verbal chess where the pieces were life and honor, and the board was a throne room. This is a story of the Jester who not only challenged the king, but, by mocking the very logic of power, found a crack in its machinery, and, in the most unexpected way, won. But to understand the magnitude of his feat, first we must immerse ourselves in the world that surrounded him. Before following the steps of Triboulet, we must decode the stage on which he performed, the French Renaissance court. Forget for a moment the idyllic paintings. This was not just a place of excessive luxury, endless banquets, and shining robes. It was, above all, theater, but an extremely coded theater, where every movement was a message, every whisper conspiracy, and every look an evaluation. Protocol was not etiquette. It was the unwritten constitution of a microcosm. Here, every gesture, the tilt of the head, the position of the hands, the tone of voice, had a precise, measured, and political meaning. Every laugh, especially laughter, had a consequence. To laugh with someone was an act of alliance. To laugh at someone was a declaration of war. The monarchs of the Renaissance, such as Francis I, the great rival of Charles V, were obsessed with centralizing power. The court was not just their residence. It was a primary instrument for that end. It was a stage where the loyalty of the nobility was negotiated, where favors were distributed like currency, and where alliances were sealed between side glances and poisoned toasts. In this ecosystem of ambition, dazzling ceremonies were performed to reinforce the king's divinity. Betrayals were plotted in tapestry hallways, and offenses that would seem trivial to us today were punished with exemplary severity. A misinterpreted comment, an unjustified absence, a look considered disrespectful. Honor was a fragile armor, and a single word could crack it forever. And in the center of this universe of solemnity, occupying a physical and symbolic space that defied all categories, was a figure of the Jester. The royal Jester, like Triboulet, occupied a strange, almost paradoxical place. He was, simultaneously, a walking privilege and a dangerous vulnerability. Dressed in the loud colors of the absurd, with his full scepter or merit in hand, he enjoyed a unique, almost magical license. The license to say the unspeakable. He could joke about ministers' greed, mimic a general's limp, or subtly question the wisdom of a royal decision. It was believed, or at least pretended to be believed, that his words, coming from the mouth of a fool, lacked political weight. But that was the most powerful illusion of all, because behind the clown's disguise the good Jester, and Triboulet was one of the best, did not make innocent jokes. He told the truth, the most uncomfortable truth, the most penetrating observation. He simply disguised it as a joke, and truth, in a court built on convenience and half-lies, cuts sharper and reaches deeper than any sword. The Jester was a distorted yet faithful mirror of power, and looking at oneself in it could be a harrowing experience. But who was really the man behind the bells? Historical data about Triboulet leaves us fascinating, though fragmented, clues, never a complete photographic portrait. We know he was born as Nicholas Ferrial around the year 1479, and that his wit and his peculiarity. Chronicles speak of a singular physique, probably a hunchback or unusual features that the era associated with a natural fool took him to the highest circles. He served as a jester and trusted man to two kings. First Louis XII, the father of the people, and later and more famously, to his successor and son-in-law, Francis I, the ultimate Renaissance monarch, a lover of art, war, and culture. Triboulet was not a simple entertainer. He held an official title, Faux du Roi, which means the king's fool, and a salary that placed him above many servants. He was famous for his sharp tongue, capable of finding anyone's weak point with the speed of a duelist, and for his instant wit, which resolved tense situations with one clever remark or ignited them with another. However, the essential thing about Triboulet was not how he looked, but how he thought. It is a modern mistake to consider the Jester as a simple idiot or a mentally ill person kept for amusement. Quite the opposite. The professional Jester, and particularly one of Triboulet's stature, was an observer of extraordinary insight. He was an anthropologist of power, a student of human nature in its most competitive environment. He knew the passions, the vanities, and the fears of every character in the court, just as a director knows his actors. He handled language not like an amateur, but with the precision of a surgeon. He knew exactly where to make the cut a joke, so that pride would bleed, when to drop a comment like a drop of acid, and when it was a strategic moment to withdraw, leaving the sting to ferment in the silence. His role, therefore, was one of extraordinary complexity. Making the court laugh was not mere entertainment to relieve palace boredom. It was a subtle, yet powerful, form of political intervention. A well-timed joke could disarm an adversary of the king without the need for a decree, ridiculing their arguments before they were even presented in the council. Another joke, even more dangerous, could remind the monarch himself, at just the right moment, of the fragility of his image or the discontent his decisions were spreading among his people. The Jester was the uncomfortable conscience, the thermometer of public opinion, and sometimes the catalyst for change. And all of this game, this constant dance on a razor's edge, took place in the supposed intimacy of the court, where walls had ears and smiles could hide daggers. That is why the Jester's work was intrinsically subversive. He played with fire, and Triboulet, it seems, loved to heat the flames. And so we reached a crucial moment, the incident that could have been the end of the story and that, instead, immortalized it. Historical sources, as is often the case with the juiciest anecdotes, do not always agree on the exact details. However, through various chronicles and the powerful oral tradition, a persistent version emerges, a core dramatic truth that the centuries have polished like a gemstone. It happened during a royal audience, one of those public moments where etiquette was stiffer than steel. Triboulet, perhaps swept away by the success of his previous jokes, perhaps testing the new limits of his privilege, or simply the victim of a fatal burst of inspiration, crossed the line. He went further than what was allowed. Even for him, the accounts vary on the precise nature of the offense. Some say that, in an act of unprecedented boldness, he slapped or struck the backside of King Francis I in the middle of a physical joke, a bodily mockery that was intolerable for royal majesty. Others suggest that he launched a taunt that was too sharp, a mockery directed not at a courtier, but directly at the queen or the king's own person, crossing a thin barrier that separated permitted satire from punishable insult. Still others speak of a gesture, a grimace, an act of pantomime that those present, those severe guardians of protocol, considered a blasphemy against royal decorum. The effect was instantaneous and electric. The room froze. The constant murmur of the court, that background noise of silks and whispers, ceased at once, drowned by a thick silence charged with horror. What until that moment had been tolerated as the professional amusement of the fool, the paid eccentricity of a special servant, was transformed in the blink of an eye into something completely different. A personal offense, a direct challenge to the authority of the monarch, a crack in the very spectacle of power. The king was no longer smiling, and the verdict, as befits an act of lèse-majesté, which means high treason against the crown, was swift and terrible, death. The sentence echoed through the silent room. Not many men have their capital punishment announced out loud, clearly and without mitigation, in front of the entire elite of the kingdom. For a jester, whose daily survival depended solely on the shifting moods and the condescending smile of the king, this sentence was not just a physical condemnation. It was the exact, brutal measurement of the limits of his license. It was the proof that privilege would be revoked in a second, that the invisible contract between power and laughter had been broken. Triboulet had played the game, and, It seemed he had lost. He had bitten the hand that fed him, and that hand, now clenched into a fist, was prepared to strike. And it is here, at the very precipice of doom, where the story of Triboulet takes a turn that elevates it from an anecdote to a legend. At this point, it is worth remembering that we are working with accounts passed down by chroniclers who often prioritize moral lessons, narrative elegance, or symbolism over forensic precision. Tradition, magnified by time, tells us that King Francis I, perhaps still amused by the extravagance of the situation, or moved by a final vestige of affection for his old Jester, or simply following the courtly custom of granting a final wish to a condemned man, offered Triboulet a macabre choice, a final act of apparent generosity. He could choose the manner of his own death. The question, seen up close, has a hint of sublime cruelty, almost poetic. It is the illusion of freedom offered to someone who has lost all freedom. Choose how you want to die is not a favor. It is a refined form of psychological torture. But Triboulet, the master of words and the observer of human nature, instead of bowing his knee, begging in tears, or choosing a quick method, did something that, on the surface, seemed like his final and most desperate joke. With a serenity that must have been unnerving, and with that clear voice that had so often made a room erupt in laughter, he uttered the sentence that would save him, the verdict that condemned the logic of his own execution. "By Saint Nicaise and Saint Penzedu," he said, invoking mockery saints, the fictional patrons of madness, patron saints of folly, I choose to die of old age. The genius of this phrase lies in its devastating simplicity. It was not a plea. It was not an open challenge. It was a master move on the chessboard of logic and sovereignty. In its simplicity, it demonstrated the two qualities that define Triboulet: a lightning-fast wit, capable of finding the only exit in a dead-end street, and an innate audacity, the guts to play by the king's own rules to turn them against him. He was not asking for mercy. He was presenting an unsolvable dilemma to the sovereign power. How you execute a man whose chosen manner of death is a natural and inevitable process that will occur if allowed in an indefinite future. To execute him now would be to deny him his choice, turning the royal grace into a farce. The phrase forced the king to look into the mirror of his own absolute power, showing him its most absurd limitation. He could not make a man die of old age by royal decree. The reaction in the room was a perfect study in suspense and release. First came the silence, even deeper than before, as the courtiers' minds processed the sublime insolence of the answer. Then a murmur, a nervous laugh that sprouted here and there, contained, fearful of being the first to dare. And finally, breaking the tension like thunder after a storm, came the loud, open laughter of the king himself. Why did Francis I laugh? Because Triboulet's answer had done something miraculous. It had completely dismantled the dramatic solemnity of the execution scene. Instead of the tragic figure of a condemned man begging for his life, the jester had turned the moment into something else, an intellectual game, a final and brilliant exercise of his profession. He had played, and he had won, using the monarch's own logic as a weapon. The king found himself trapped in his own device. If he carried out the original death sentence after offering the choice, he would be reduced to the figure of a literal-minded tyrant, lacking wit or greatness, who broke his own word in the face of a perfect joke. If, instead, he pardoned him, he would appear not only as a generous sovereign, but also as someone intelligent enough to appreciate the genius of the move. Some versions of the story claim the sentence was commuted to banishment from the court. Others say he was simply pardoned with a severe warning. The specific result varies, but the core remains the same. The death penalty was revoked. Triboulet left that room not with his head held high in pride, but with something more valuable, his intelligence intact and his life reclaimed. This story's enduring value goes beyond mere entertainment. We might ask, did it exactly happen this way? The honest answer is, a little bit of both. There are solid records placing Triboulet as the official jester of Louis XII and Francis I. Chronicles of the time, such as those by Brantome, collect versions of this anecdote. But as with all stories that survive for centuries outside of formal judicial archives, the border between verifiable historical fact and edifying moral fable becomes porous and blurred. This is where its true power lies. The anecdote of Triboulet works as a powerful mirror of the societies that have retold it. It shows the symbolic triumph of the weak over the strong, using the weapons of the mind. Irony, this story tells you can save, but it can also condemn. It all depends on the skill of the one who wields it, the moment it is cast, and the ear that receives it. What, then, does the Odyssey of Triboulet teach the men and women of the 21st century? His legacy can be broken down into two lessons, one simple, almost a slogan, and another deeply complex, inviting prolonged reflection. The simple lesson is the most comforting and cinematic. Wit, when well calibrated, well employed at the right moment, and with the necessary courage, can change a person's immediate destiny. The right phrase, launch with precision, can disarm anger, deactivate a sentence, and open a crack in an insurmountable wall of authority. It is a triumph of the agile mind over brute force, the victory of the word over sword. Thanks for watching. Like, subscribe, and comment the story you know that you'd like to see. See you in the next story. Bye-bye.